Hello, welcome to Fire and Ash. My name is Sapphire.
And I'm Ashley.
And today we're just going to give you guys 20 plant tips.
Our first tip that we have for you, it is actually related to the number one killer of all houseplants, and that's overwatering. Now, I know we're all guilty of it. We want to just love our plants and we want to take care of them, so we give them the light and the water, and we give them too much water. Not all plants need to be watered on the same schedule. You know, our Dracaena here, any plant in the Dracaena family typically likes to dry out. They don't like to maintain moisture in their soil. So once it's dried out almost thoroughly, then I give it a good watering. We actually have some peperomia here. Those ones don't like to dry out as much, but they can handle a little more of a drier climate. Now, unlike our two different families here that like to dry out, we have our coleus, and a coleus plant, those all typically like to maintain that moisture. Now, our second tip would be to invest in a moisture meter. You can find this moisture meter online. We'll actually include the link in the description below, and you can get a moisture meter just like this for under $15. Now, this moisture meter is not only super handy and beneficial, but it's actually almost fun too. So you just stick it into the soil like so. If the plant has like a stronger root system, or if it's a little more root bound, sometimes you just shimmy it in, and then you'd read here, oh, it's, you know, somewhat dry, and I can give it some water tomorrow.
Leaves that look shiny, like this peperomia, tend to store water in the leaves, and for that reason, you don't need to water them as much. And similarly, this Dracaena has a trunk that almost looks like it's like a tree trunk. Now those thick trunks also store water, and that's why the Dracaenas only need to be watered maybe 2 or 3 times a month. There's certain chemicals that are usually in your tap water. So if you fill up a pitcher and leave the top off and let it sit out, you know, for a day or so, a lot of those minerals or, you know, those chemicals will evaporate. Some of those chemicals are kind of harmful to your plant. So certain species like calatheas are particularly sensitive to chemicals in water. So if you water a plant, even if you have all the other conditions perfect, if you're watering it with tap water, you might still see browning in your leaves, and the plant might even still die over time. So the next thing we wanted to talk about is drainage. And drainage is basically the way the water drains through your pot. So if you have holes in the bottom of your pot, the water's going to drain out the bottom. If you don't have holes in the bottom of your pot, then the water's going to sit there. That's considered not good drainage. Now that's kind of dangerous because that goes back to the overwatering thing. You can water your plant, and then if your roots are sitting in the water, it can cause root rot and your plant will die. So drainage is very important, and that's the reason why we have these smaller pots inside these larger pots, because this pot has holes in it, this doesn't.
If your pot does not have holes in it, you could possibly drill holes. We've done that. We've drilled holes in the bottom of pots before with a power drill. A lot of plants will actually come with the drainage tray on the bottom, which a lot of them you can pop off. And if you want your plant to look gorgeous, you can have it still in the nursery pot and in the little gorgeous color pot.
Yeah, you just kind of disguise it in one of these.
Yeah.
And another thing that helps with drainage, you can put rocks in the bottom of your pot, and the rocks will be where all the water settles. So your roots that are up here in the soil will never hold that water because the rocks at the bottom. So if you wanted to really put your plant in something like this, just recommend putting a thin layer of rocks at the bottom, something that can separate the water from the roots so that the roots never sit in there.
Yes, definitely. Lots of rocks in the bottom of all of our pots. It definitely helps.
And that kind of brings us into our next point, which is just talking about the soil. The soil is very important, partially for what we were just talking about with overwatering and drainage, but it's also important because the soil is where the plant gets its nutrients.
Another major tip is proper soil. Having proper soil for a specific type of plant is super important. You should always research your plants to determine whether it needs a succulent type soil or a moisture lock soil. We do have a coleus plant here. This type of plant likes to maintain pretty moist soil, thoroughly moist, so we've actually added peat moss to the soil. So it's just a regular moisture lock soil blend, and then we mixed in a little bit of that peat moss, and that holds in not only moisture, but it provides nutrients as well. In our Dracaena plants or any of our succulents, we use a succulent soil, and then we actually just found out that you can add sand to the you can add sand to the you can add sand to the soil. Succulent soil is great for draining out that moisture. The soil actually has normally like wood chips in it, like thicker chunks.
There's stuff in the soil that basically absorbs excess water, so it prevents overwatering, and that can save your plant.
Definitely, and it keeps the soil, it's really just light and almost kind of fluffy and dry. But it definitely lets the moisture, like all the water, just drain right through, and so it can get that nice thorough watering.
For your plants to be the healthiest they can be, it's good to just replenish the soil, because it just gives them like all these nutrients that they need regularly to survive and be beautiful. And that's another thing, like if you notice a plant stops growing and nothing else seems wrong about it, the leaves aren't turning green or anything, or aren't turning the leaves aren't turning red or anything.
That'd be a bad sign. They're not turning green.
The leaves aren't turning green. So if the leaves aren't turning red, or I was saying red.
Get your colors right.
Okay. So basically, if you have a plant that's been in the same pot for a long time, and you notice it stops growing and nothing else looks wrong about it, you might just need to replenish the soil. A couple other things we just wanted to say about soil is that you can buy fertilizer, but be wary of fertilizer. Not every single plant can handle it. So if your plant grows very slowly, or if you fertilize your plant during the winter or not growing season, it can actually damage your plant, and they get what's called fertilizer burn, I think, and basically your leaves will all start turning yellow. And the plants can come back from it, but it kind of shocks it. So it's just something to keep in mind. So I would recommend only fertilize plants that are actually growing. Mostly do it in spring, and if you're unsure, always look it up. Don't just fertilize a plant. I did it to a couple of my plants. She did it to a couple of her plants. Some of them did die, so.
I killed 2 gorgeous Dracaena, a big Dracaena. It was tall. It was a tree. I killed it.
And all the leaves will just start falling off. You can try to get it out of the soil, which we did, but once you fertilize the plant and it absorbs that fertilizer, if it's too much, then it's kind of too late once you replace the soil. It still has all that extra fertilizer in it.
Basically, OD'd on fertilizer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the next thing we're going to talk about is the pots. Say if there's a pot this size, if I was going to move this up, I would move it up to something that was maybe around this size. I would not move it up to something like this size or this size. And the reason why is because you don't want your roots to be too far from the bottom of the pot. You basically want your roots to occupy most of the pot it's in. And the reason for that is because it allows the roots to absorb the water. Now, if you have your little tiny roots and they're sitting in this big old pot and you water it, all the water is going to rush down to the bottom, and the roots aren't really going to get any of that water. Whereas you have your plant in a small pot and the roots are just being surrounded like this by dirt, then the roots can absorb all that water. So keep that in mind when you're repotting. Don't jump up too big of a size.
Now, a lot of individuals will get super excited. They'll get their new plant, and it comes in a nursery pot like this one. Nursery pots are great. They perfectly hold in just that small amount of roots. Now, you can actually keep this plant in here for months. I mean, quite often it's at least a few months. It's not going to outgrow it super quick. And if you look in the bottom, this actually has the self-watering strings still in it, but if there are roots coming out of the bottom, then okay, you could probably repot it. Or you can always, slightly pull up the plant and peek at the roots, depending on how dry the soil is. But we love our decorative cover pots, and we just keep them in the small little nursery pots and pop them in here. Now, if it doesn't fit perfectly in the nursery pot, you can actually, fun fact, put something to place in the bottom of the pot. I've put rocks in here and then just put the nursery pot right up in there. The lid or like a cap to something, like an old peanut butter jar, because it steps it up about an inch. So you can just put something in there to kind of prop it up a little bit. All right, one of our next tips is about pests. Now, there are several different types of pests that can go along with having houseplants. One that we've encountered personally, fungus gnats. Those fungus gnats are terrible. They will actually live and lay eggs in the top moist part of the soil, and they're fast reproducing, and it's just a mean, nasty pest.
It's one of the most common ones too. You can find rocks like this from Walmart or the dollar store, and if you put a thin layer of rocks on the top of your soil, it'll actually stop those, if you have fungus gnats in your soil, it'll actually suffocate the ones that are in there, and it also stops the new fungus gnats from getting into your soil. So that's one way you can stop the infestation. If you're constantly overwatering your plants and the top of the soil is always moist, that's an ideal climate or ideal setting for fungus gnats to start breeding.
You can actually let some of your plants dry out. Obviously you don't want to kill them without watering them completely, but those fungus gnats love the moisture. So if you, number one, put the rocks on the top, number two, let it dry out, or number three, you could try an insecticidal spray, something like this. And this insecticidal spray, I did try this and it seemed to help a little bit, but I think the rocks were our best cure for the fungus gnats. But I have had some great reviews for the insecticidal spray.
The next thing we're going to talk about is pinching, pruning, and propagation. When you're pinching a plant, mainly you're doing it to encourage bushier growth. So this coleus is a perfect example. What you do is you can pinch the top of the stem on this part, and that will encourage these two little guys right here to grow out more bushy. You can also prune your plants. Now when you're pruning, you're basically just cutting back some of the foliage, and you can do this for different reasons. Some plants will grow more bushy when you prune them back, but other plants just, maybe you want them to look better. So if you see a plant like this coleus right here that has dead leaves on the bottom, you can cut those off, and that will actually encourage more growth in your plant. Now the reason why is because your plant dedicates resources to this dead foliage. So if you cut that off, your plant stops wasting energy, and it gives more energy to the foliage that's actually still alive. And then propagating your plant is basically just creating new plants out of the plants you already have. For example, I took one of these leaves off, just like this, and I put it in the dirt right here. Now it hasn't grown a stem or anything, but I did that about 5 or 6 months ago, and this one singular leaf started growing roots. Coleus plants are one of the easiest plants I found to propagate. We have maybe around 20 or 30 of these plants in our house just because of how easy it is. All you do is just cut the stem basically anywhere where there's a node, anywhere where there's a leaf growing, and most likely roots will grow from that spot. I've even cut pieces off that were about that big, and I actually have one growing in the bathroom right now that I'll show you guys.
And it's just to be placed in a clear glass container. It's called water propagating, and you'll see that in one of our upcoming videos. All right, and our next tip that we have for overall care with your plant is dusting the leaves. Now this can be done with either a damp paper towel, just damp with water, or an old towel or rag, and then you would just run the cloth along the leaf to literally just dust off the leaves. Now this encourages growth because it allows the leaf to be more exposed. Now if you have a dusty plant, you know, there's dust on the surface of the leaves, it almost acts as like a sunblock. And it doesn't allow the plant to absorb as much light because it's being blocked by all the dust. So if you clean your plants regularly, dust off those leaves, it helps your plant to absorb the sunlight, it encourages growth, and with over 100 houseplants, we are guilty of not dusting enough, but we do notice a difference when it is done regularly, and it just overall makes your plants look so nice. So dust as often as you can, clean off those leaves, and your plants should grow.
Also, just to add an extra step to that, there's actually this stuff called leaf shine you can get like this. And basically, while you're dusting, you can also shine your leaves. So I'll show you an example here of my monstera that I used leaf shine on today, and it looks wonderful. So the next thing we'll talk about is just humidity. Now, some plants are native to humid parts of the world. So when you have them in your home, you want to create a similar setting so that they can thrive. A perfect example, again, is this monstera here. Now, monstera needs high humidity and it likes warm temperatures. We live in Arizona where it's very, very dry, so we use humidifiers in our house to help create more of an ideal environment for the plants. And humidifiers are also good for humans, so it's just a win-win. So another tip we have is to group your plants together, group similar plants together. For example, this peperomia, this Dracaena. These two can be in a similar area of your house, and these two can be in a similar area of your house. Now, you don't have to do this, but for example, usually lighting requirements with the same type of plant are similar. So if you have two of the same type of plant near the same window, you already know that they're getting similar light, and that's going to be perfect for their care. Now, some plants can survive in multiple lighting situations, so it's just important to do your research there. The plants actually put off humidity the same way that people put off body heat. So if you keep your plants close to each other, it helps maintain the humidity at a higher level. And the last tips we wanted to give you guys just have to do with lighting. One tip for lighting is that plants that have variegation, which is usually like color on the leaves like these, those plants usually require more light. And if you put your plant with variegation in a place where there's not a lot of light, your leaves are going to start losing that color. So like for this, for example, it's getting good light right now, but if it stops getting good light, it's going to look more like this. For coleus, some of the leaves are red or orange. Coleus plants that don't get enough light, their leaves will just be completely green. So you might notice that your smaller leaves are purple, and then your bigger leaves actually turn green because they're not getting enough light. And your plant can actually lose all of its color without the right lighting conditions. Another thing is to just make sure you look at the light coming through your house at different times of day. So bright light is considered direct beams. You don't want most of your plants to be actually getting hit with sun rays. When it comes to lighting, plants usually have 3 different things that it's going to say. If you look at the label that came with your plant, it's either going to say it's a low light, a medium light, or a bright light. Those are usually the categories. There might be different wording, but usually those are the 3 different categories. So a low light plant is something that can tolerate low light, but that doesn't mean you necessarily need to put it in a spot where it gets low light. You just don't want to put it in a spot where it gets very bright light. And the reason why is because sometimes that can fry the plant's leaves. And you can see this example here on this aglaonema, how the leaves looked a little burned. And that could be possibly from too much sunlight, because this is a plant that's considered a lower light. Plants that are medium to high light would be plants that can sit in a window, but you still don't want these plants to be getting hit with direct sun rays, because that can burn the leaves as well.
We have over 100 houseplants, but we don't even have the best light in our house, to be honest with you.
Very true.
We have a couple of our main windows, and we have our plants like clustered together by the windows, but you don't always need sunlight. It is actually proven that a plant will grow with just traditional house lights, you know, your overhead lights, your lamps. So if you want to increase the growth of your plants, you can always turn on that extra lamp, or you could invest in some grow lights as we've done, but it doesn't even need to be a special grow light. Any type of light is going to help your plants grow. And the better the light you have, the more growth you're going to see.
So that about sums it up for this video, guys. you know, you could expect to see way more videos from us. This is just our first one. We have so many plants to talk about, and we have so much valuable information. So we're gonna be making dozens and dozens and possibly hundreds of videos for you guys. If you did like what you saw in this video and you learned something, please let us know in the comments below, and also consider hitting that subscribe button so that you can be notified when we drop upcoming content. Well, that's it for today, guys. We are Phire and Ash. We will see you on the next one. Bye.